This is Jeff Krissman, and I am very, very honored and very joyous to be speaking this morning and having a conversation with a dear friend of mine and also the author of the book, Awakening from the Dream, a Kundalini Memoir. I would like to introduce Lotus Lindley. Lotus, thank you so much for being with me this morning.
Jeff, thank you so much. I'm super excited about this and really, super happy that you are doing this with me.
Absolutely. And I do want to start out, even though it is such a wonderful honor and a pleasure to be able to, usually doing these interviews with people that I have not met before, as someone who has worked with you and has learned from you, I really want to honor the work that you have done and do, with your students and with clients in terms of helping them to embody awakening and also to assist them on their journey of ascending into 5D consciousness. And I really thank you for that and honor you for what I've learned from you myself personally.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And like I always say, I'm always honored because you guys show up. We're all showing up to do this work during this time. And it's not always an easy journey, but yet here you are.
Yeah,
we are together.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
And honoring you. I wanted to start out, this is going to be a little bit of a different conversation than we had previously, but I'm very excited about this, and I know that the timeliness of this is so right on point as far as, and I'm definitely want to give you the floor and the opportunity to share your the intentions behind sharing what you're sharing today. But I know that right now I just want to kind of set this up in terms of just for viewers and listeners that with what is going on right now in the world in terms of, and I know it would be very difficult for me, and clearly I want to give you the opportunity to speak about that with all the things that are going on in the world right now, in the three-dimensional consciousness and all of the challenges and the density and the heaviness. The idea was today to be, and because I've read your book and you have spoken through that book to me so much about your journey, going through, a period of the dark night of the soul, and that being, not just a period of days or weeks, but going through different periods of that, throughout the book. I wanted to ask you, just in your own words, what you feel like being able to share, soul and its communication and how that helped you through your dark nights, so to speak, just, in terms of what this means to you at a deeper level.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Yeah, thank you. I think that one of the things, so the angle that I do come from, the book is really focused on the first 10 years of my Kundalini awakening. And that was the prism that the book is written about. And I really didn't know at the time about the ascension process. It hadn't really definitely come on my radar till much later. So the book starts in about 96, but really 2000. And the soul piece, for me, it's been this deep process of what I've called the soul's guidance. And throughout the majority of my process, so for 2 decades, was deeply connected to the soul's agenda that would be communicating through me. And because of being a way shower, there was a part of me that was able to connect with it very deeply. And the soul's guidance, it's not necessarily full of flowers and feel good. When we're connecting with the soul, we're connecting down to these depths that clear so many things away, that clarify communication within our own being. And now I understand also connecting us to our highest selves. But it's understanding that when we dip down into soul, if we're not really understanding the different flavors and textures that show up, we can misinterpret what's really happening and maybe even inhibit or miss the bigger boat of the divine communication that's going on. So right now, in this collective time of awakening, I wanted to bring the message of soul to the forefront for two different reasons. Through the ascension process, where now those who have been doing the ascension process for a long period of time and doing all of this healing and clearing are now really bringing all of these soul aspects into the physical embodiment of like the higher soul aspects, because there's more room now. But as that happens, it has a very different feeling to it than connecting to the highest self. And those who have not been doing the work, we're seeing that everything now in 2020, and we're now in, what are we, October of 2020, life and all of the players in life have been setting us up to really recognize where we've been disconnected from soul. And my hope is that the more that we understand this, we understand how to reconnect. So does that feel clear?
Oh, it definitely does.
Okay.
It definitely does. And I find that the timeliness of this, at least from my own experience, having read the book, that the way the book starts out in terms of even in the prologue, and I actually had a few questions, and I thought the relevance of this might be that these may be some experiences that people could be going through now, and maybe that the, sort of the dark night of the soul may be even, feeling much heavier or more dense due to, because I realized at the time when you were writing this, I believe this started in 1996, if I remember right. I realized the world was, I don't want to say it was a completely different place, but at the same time, though, we're certainly experiencing some things now that have been really heightened in terms of uncertainty and with social, discord, and with a lot of the things that are in play right now and things that are in flux. I don't know if that's a fair assessment or not in terms of the way the world, maybe being different today versus at the time you wrote this and revisited that time in your life.
I definitely think so. And I thought a big part of that too is the frequency level on the planet, right? So when we hit 2012, that the event of 2012 really was this jump in frequency and the consciousness of Mother Earth, right? Of Gaia. So that started amplifying the readiness for human consciousness to really take off. It'd been happening gradually, but before the internet, before being able to really access more information on these topics, on the Kundalini Awakening, most people were kind of sequestered away in their own little sacred space, going through these processes without really having any kind of playbook for it. And so the way showers really kind of paved the way for what we're started having in 2012 and really what we're having now. So
so the I appreciate that.
And when we go back thousands of years, right, with the levels of density, like it took a long time and only few of the masters, right, were able to really peel away those layers to reach the higher states. So it's been a long journey to get where we are. And now, we all have the opportunity of mastering and becoming the masters.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Yeah, and one of the things that I, when I immediately, once I picked up the book and started to read, I was immediately just completely, so I'm trying to use the word here, like I mean, maybe the words may not be flowing or the word may not come to me, but I found myself deeply, this was speaking to me, I guess is the only way I can say that at the moment. And I felt like I was literally experiencing as much as one person can experience what another person was experiencing, but I also found a lot of commonality with your experience. In other words, I could very much identify, while I could never know for sure exactly what it felt like to you going through this period of the dark night of the soul. as you started writing about it, that I definitely could identify with it. And there was things that were certainly speaking to experiences that I've had.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that that has been one of the things that has been most helpful for me, because I actually had just met you at the time that I dove in and started reading it. And it's almost like, in a way, I got to experience your journey as much as one person can experience another's journey. And yet it was also speaking to me about things that were similar in my own life that I had struggled with or are struggling with.
Absolutely. And I love our conversations that we've had, because, you know, you've been doing this work for so long, you know, and that's really what, one of the things that I love about this book and my story is that really it's to help people. Since I didn't have the reflection, I love it when somebody has that reflection and those aha moments when you can go, oh my gosh, okay, I was experiencing this same thing. I went through this same thing or similar. Now I have more clarity. Now I have more peace about it, perhaps. Now I have deeper understanding. So yeah, I love that.
Yeah, thank you. And I was going to say, I could spend the next hour just sitting here talking to you about how much the book has impacted me and how wonderful it is. But I wanted to also, in terms of making this, you know, relevant for people who are watching and listening. And so if it's okay with you, what I wanted to do was I picked, you know, a few specific experiences that you had, and what I would say about all of these, and there again, this is just, you know, one person's perspective, is that it, you know, this is, at least to me, what spoke to me is, you know, that soul communication that you were receiving at a very subtle level, and in a lot of cases, very, very subtle is what it sounded like. But I don't want to speak on your behalf, but I thought I would maybe just, you know, literally, I made some brief notes and just thought I would maybe ask you to elaborate a little bit about some specific experiences that you had, and, you know, anything that you would want to add or share that would, you know, that I feel, I intuit would be very relevant for people and would really speak to people that can identify with these things.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So starting off here, I wanted to ask you, and this was really the first one, and I thought I'd kind of start with a little bit of a, just in terms of the scope of this, but although you may have a lot to say about it, and I don't want to make any assumptions, when you spoke about the point at which you were in your loft with Carl the night that you made the journal entry, and you had this, what you referred to as a deep knowing that, and I don't, and there again, I apologize if I definitely am paraphrasing this, but my understanding was from reading this that you knew that was your last night living there with him. And at the same time, I wanted to ask you just what that felt like to you in terms of getting that kinds of, you know, subtle communication or having that deep knowing, what that felt like to you. I don't know if that was the first time that had happened for you, but that was the first thing that I had read, you know, in the book. And so I just wanted to ask you a little bit if there's anything you could share or add or speak to about that experience.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not going to go into the full background because it is in the book, but I will say that this was a 5-year relationship that was a very dense and heavy relationship, and our souls had a lot of shadow work to do together, and we were constantly on different ends of the polarity, so to speak. And what was very interesting, so it was still very mysterious to me what was happening in my life. There were 2 instances while I was still in denial about the fact that I needed to leave the relationship again, right, for the 3rd time. And literally my soul connection, again, you know, everything that I share is just my perspective as well, my personal experience. Some may resonate with some people, some may not. There was definitely a magic working through my being, right? And that's how I termed it sort of at the time, because I didn't know anything about soul. I was not spiritually dialed in that way. So 2 different things happened. One day I went into, and this is not in the book, one day I went into my jeans pockets before I did the laundry, and there was a little tab with a phone number that was, you know how you have the people when you are advertising on bulletin boards for different things, right? So this was for a 1-bedroom apartment with the phone number.
Huh.
And I had no recollection of taking that number.
Wow.
So there was a part of me that knew that this was needing to happen, even though I was still in denial. So we could call it soul, we can call it an aspect of our highest self. You know, there's so many labels. The second thing that happened was that at one point, because we were engaged, I realized that my engagement ring was gone off my hand. And I had no idea where the ring went. I never took it off. So one day I'm cleaning in the bathroom, and every now and then, you know, like every couple months, I would get up on these top shelves. So I'd have to like climb up on the toilet and all that. So I'm cleaning, and there's my ring. So how in the world did the ring get off my hand and get tucked away?
Yeah.
So these were kind of very mysterious to me. and right before we left, or before I moved out, I had moved basically into a different room for a few months because we basically stopped talking. And what was so fascinating to me, and again, I had no context for what was happening, when I was in the kitchen, which was sort of my art room because it was a loft and there was only like one partition. So, which was my art room, when I would go into my space, it was silent. When I would go out into the main space, I was aware that there was like this staticky noise happening. And I was so puzzled by what that was because I didn't have any context of what energy was. And I didn't understand the vibration that was out in that space and the silent vibration, you know, frequency that was in my space. So when it came time to actually leave, I just knew. We had had one other altercation. We clearly were not on the same page. And he left and I sat. I was fairly neutral. I knew that it was time. I knew that it was over. So as I was writing, I was kind of puzzled over the whole purpose of this 5 years. And I had just this deep, deep, deep awareness that even though I didn't know what it was, I knew that something very important had happened now that I was ready to leave. And I knew that I would leave, and I knew that I would not return again. So what I had realized was that the karmic connection, whatever that lesson was that we had spent this time dancing together, had been done, had been resolved.
Yeah.
And in that resolution, I had this sense that it was going to open me up to something very different. I knew that I would now be able to, you know, now I'll use the words access, right? Some other level of myself that I would not have been able to access with that relationship. Doing that shadow work, or rather that relationship triggering so much shadow that I didn't even know I had in me. Okay. So yeah, it was like this voice that was starting to communicate just through these little whispers or through literal physical world actions that were so baffling to me at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that so much. And I was going to ask you, and I don't want to assume anything here. When you had this experience, did you really, am I assuming here that you didn't necessarily have anyone that you know, in terms of a teacher or a, you know, a physical guide that you could, you know, someone that you could work with and speak with about these things? So this was all really just you going through this. And
This was
trying your best
all,
to navigate?
yeah, this was all unknown. I was like 5 or 6 years in, sober, in Alcoholics Anonymous. We talked about a higher power. We talked about God, but nothing did we touch on to this subtleties, right? So it's the subtleties that my soul has taught me about, because it's the going within and recognizing these subtle layers within, in which we are deeply and highly empowered. But it's the last place that the majority of people want to go, is within.
Yeah.
Including
Yeah.
myself for many years.
Wow. Wow. And I'm almost, and this is just coming up in, just in the moment as I'm hearing you speak about these things. Is it fair to say that, do you find the work that you're doing today, not I definitely don't want to get us off topic, although I think this is all part of this, in a lot of ways, is this ultimately the work that you do? Is this you being that guide and that way shower for people who need, who don't want to have to go through this alone and don't want to have to figure all this out? I realize some things we have to figure out on our own, but in terms of, I assume this informs the work that you have been doing and still do today.
Most definitely. Most definitely. And there are different layers of it, but it's all about returning back within, understanding, learning the communications from our higher knowing, deeper knowing within us that already exists. And how do we reconnect with that? Yes.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. And I was going to ask too, I know one of the things that, that you have spoken about before, and that really, that hits me right here, is there's this tendency, and as humans, in a situation where let's say a relationship is not going well and it feels like the end is near, and maybe, with all of the things going on in the world, some people may find themselves at this point, in different kinds of relationships. Is it, one of the things I was going to ask you is the temptation as humans to go into that density and that story, and because I could clearly see how it would have been very easy for you to have gotten caught up in all of the density of what it was like to be at the crossroads of a relationship, that you definitely had that soul communication and those signs that it was over, ending, and was over. But I also realize as humans, sometimes we can cling to those things because we're so busy wrapped up in the density or the story about it,
Right.
and how we've been hurt or how that person's disappointed us. And I don't know if that makes sense at all, but just getting some understanding of the difficulty sometimes, or we can make it more complicated as human beings. I don't know if you had anything that you might add, just as far as the tendency or the temptation for people to go into that density sometimes and stay there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, one of the things that I always like to say is, we know when we know, right? We'll know when we know. And, I certainly didn't just have the epiphany and I was free. Like I said, I mean, we've been back and forth over 5 years, moving out back and forth, 3 different times. So there was a lot of story that I ran through, for sure. And a lot of my own levels of self-negation, self-compromise, where I wasn't honoring myself or even my truth, right? Or my intuition. And at the same time, I really needed the medicine of this relationship. I mean, it's like 2 people come together, and oftentimes when we have like a deep karmic clearing, it's going to fit like a glove. And, there was a lot of love, and there was a lot of love for what each of us could even, like what we could call it for that time. Now I know love to be very different than I knew love to be then, right? But yes, I think it is easy to get stuck in that inner Velcro, is what I like to call it. It's like, trying to peel that Velcro away sometimes is so challenging. And it's because there's still something that is unresolved. Or there's an unwillingness to actually step into, or maybe not even just knowing how. You know, we're not given tools for any of this, right? We aren't given any manual for how to become functional, emotionally mature human beings, because that isn't just how we've evolved up to this point, but that is definitely where we're going. So,
Yeah.
yeah, sure.
I appreciate that. And one of the things that I found so compelling, I think that's the word I was looking for, and I could identify with, was that was really just in terms of the beginning of the story. In other words, there was all
Right.
of the experiences, and I'm certainly going to have some of these I do want to ask you about, in terms of when you moved to your own place and just,
Mm-hmm.
dealing with the transition
Mm-hmm.
and, the further awakenings that you were having. But at the same time, though, it sounds like also, and not to, I don't want to come to any conclusions for you, but it sounds as though there, the dark night of the soul, those some of those challenges continued, but in different ways, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of you working through the, in terms of the bigger picture.
Absolutely. Yeah. For me, the dark night of the soul, I think, has been split up into chapters and
Yeah.
different phases, right? I always work with phases and stages because I've recognized that we're always moving through these different new layers.
Yeah.
So yes, I think that definitely that after leaving that relationship, I mean, I could say even that a big part of that relationship was a big dark night of the soul, but then definitely leaving that relationship had its period of time because of the big shift that happened inside of me. I was kind of starting over brand new as a brand new person, and I had lost context really of who I'd been. So yeah.
I appreciate it. And I was going to ask as well, one of the in terms of the stories that I certainly did have, some things I wanted to ask you about, was when you were experiencing vertigo and all of the
Mm-hmm.
physical, all of the physical symptoms that you were going through, and just in terms of what that time felt like for you, and, how you, looking back now, how you see that in some ways that was I assume is a period of transformation for you.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I feel very strongly about from my experience is that nothing ever happens in our physical body that it isn't predisposed to take place from the energetic layers. So this goes for, flus, illnesses. I would go as far as to saying sometimes even accidents that happen, right? Because depending on the coherence or our karma or our lessons or things that are trying to get our attention, i.e. soul,
Yeah.
Our physical form cannot be separated from our energetic form, our soul, and our spirit.
Yeah.
So that for me, has been a very important teaching, because I certainly did not always feel that grounded about what would happen in my physical form. Years as being a very having very strong hypochondriac tendencies and fears of all sorts of things, this path has definitely shown me. So I believe when we surrender to anything that's happening in our physical form, we are able to download, so to speak, the transformation that's attempting to take place.
Yeah.
So what I've learned over the years is that if I start to feel sick, I don't put my energy and my attention outside of me. I find quiet, I rest, I sleep, I don't watch TV, I don't really read that much, I don't get on the computer, because all of those things disconnect me from this deeper teaching that is actually taking place by soul.
Yeah. Yeah.
From a deeper wisdom than what my ego understands. So I had to learn this the hard way, you know, a couple of times. And I will say, so I'll backtrack really quick to the flu in 96, right after Carl and I split up. I went through this crazy, mysterious kind of flu. I was sicker than I think I'd ever really known that I had been before.
Yeah.
And during that period of time, there was so much happening internally. Literally, it was like I was watching this kaleidoscope of memories and energy taking all of these different forms. And again, this was before I had any idea what this was. And I was held somewhat debilitated, consciousness wise. So I was able to really recognize that now I understand the terms for it. I was clearing a lot of old timelines and a lot of density. I was clearing the residual of the karma from that relationship. And because I'd also started tapping into more spiritual things over a very short period of time, once I got into my own home, I was reading things on Eckankar, I can never pronounce it, Rastafarianism, some on Buddhism. So I started becoming this sponge for higher vibrational information and food for my soul. So even while I was held in this crazy flu, I would see, like, it was like I was tripping in some, and not that I've ever taken psychedelics, but this definitely felt like it. I would see at certain points, like different energetic forms or plants, right? Because I was reading about the power of plants, like dancing in my consciousness in these different colors. And I knew that I was receiving information, but I couldn't have told you what it was about, why, anything.
Yeah.
And that was like this entrance into what transforms within our physical body when we surrender. So then, yes, the vertigo, I had a little bit harder time surrendering to that because I was very much in my ego-driven, compelling process to prove that I mattered. Okay, to prove that, you know, that I was something based on the stories that I didn't matter, right? So when I got vertigo, my whole, everything that I felt like I'd built crashed down. And that was definitely a snippet of a dark night of a soul for a period of time. I felt very depressed. I felt very agitated. I felt very victimized by my physical body. I felt like everything that I had worked for was crumbling. I felt a great loss of control, and I felt very powerless. And I couldn't move around because of the vertigo to try to fix it or to make it go away. So I was left with myself. And once I surrendered, so a lot of my work, and you'll hear me talk a lot about, even probably in this conversation or the book, if I talk about the paths that I've walked, it's the path of the body and the path of surrender. Those two go hand in hand. Surrender is one of the hardest things. Surrender wants us to come inside. into the unknown to connect with soul.
Yeah. Yeah, that speaks to me so loudly. I mean, it really does. It reaches me. And I was going to ask you, as far as, talking about, what you experienced through the body, one of the examples, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about this, because I can certainly identify, and my belief is that other people, or I intuit that other people will as well. You were speaking about, during the first illness, after you had moved into your own place. And what you wrote is essentially there were certain foods, and there again, I may be paraphrasing a little bit, certain foods that you had liked before, and you suddenly found yourself no longer wanting certain things, and that there was this feeling like there was some sort of cleansing taking place. But it sounds like, at least what I intuited from what you wrote, that you weren't sure. There was no way to know. And that all you were speaking about how there was a part of you that wanted to understand intellectually, or to know, as you said it. And I found that so interesting, and I can certainly identify with being that person and wanting to understand. There has to be some empirical information that can explain exactly. And so I thought it would be very interesting, just to hear in terms of, you were experiencing these things in the body, and then your process of ultimately of surrendering, or making peace with that.
Yes. Yeah. So yes, after that first flu, when I was better, and this went on for a long time. I don't know how long, but it was at least a week. So when I came out of it, I no longer wanted meat. So this is where I started separating things from my personality and my body. I became very aware that my body had its own say that was separate from my mind or my personality. So my body consciousness no longer wanted meat. It no longer wanted coffee. And it certainly did not want me to continue smoking, but, somebody's got to draw the line someplace.
That's great.
So I stopped eating meat. I stopped drinking coffee, at least for a period of time. My body also wanted me to no longer engage in dense, negative, heavy stimulus.
Yeah.
So prior to this period of time, my tastes in entertainment were relatively dark and brooding. More not horror oriented, but definitely psychologically intense and brooding. So I've always kind of been geared towards, the like understanding human nature, and yeah. So when I came out of it, it only wanted things that felt good, which to me was sort of humorous because I hated comedies. I hated happy music. I hated, light, right? So all of a sudden I was going through these very interesting personality shifts that I did not set out to have. I felt very detached from the world. I felt very neutral, which I mistook for depression. Because I didn't understand that kind of equilibrium, because I was used to riding a lot of highs and lows for most of my life. And so I thought that I was depressed. I didn't want to be around a lot of the community in AA that I had spent, years surrounding myself with. And I left AA because on some deeper level, not necessarily my body, but I was following this other guidance that I somehow was like, okay, this isn't where I fit anymore. The problem was I didn't fit anywhere. Because now I had this whole new orientation that hadn't landed anywhere, but had become untethered from what was. So I started sort of a journey of loneliness because I had no orientation.
Interesting,
But I was guided and just felt, you know, it's like I didn't try to fill it or fix it or find anything to fill that void. Instead, I began to recognize that there was a difference between being alone and being lonely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I began to relish in the aloneness. And I found that the more alone that I was, this connection to my own depth became deeply intimate. And I was able to hear, read this, listen to this, study this, go do this, learn this. And I kind of let go gradually of it needing to make any sense, at least for a while.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you shared that, because I was gonna. That's actually, and this just completely dovetails with what I was going to ask you next. As I am seeing the connection. You spoke of reaching a point where it felt as though you had split into various levels of awareness, and that there was a part of you that didn't even seem to be affected by any degree of the suffering taking place. And so I thought it would be interesting speaking about what you just shared, you know, and any connection with that, just in terms of your.
Yeah. Well, I want to like take it into the macro a little bit, right? Into the collective, that as we go through the awakening process, we unplug from so much of what we used to have been. And all of those, you know, it's like the masters, right? The yogis talk about this all the time. The identifications that the ego makes with our personality, right? With who we are, what we're supposed to do, how we're supposed to live, kind of that whole third dimensional paradigm that we've been living in. But what we start to recognize as we begin waking up is that we start feeling very disconnected from the old paradigm, and we're left in this limbo state. And a lot of people will become very anxious in this unknown, and not always aware that they're shifting from their personality context into the witness and the observer, and that both can be present simultaneously.
Yeah.
So that we can know on one level, there's, you know, there's pain in my body because I'm really sick. There's pain in my heart because I'm grieving a loss. But once we hit, like once soul takes us through that initial initiation, right? These are initiations by our own wholeness that are trying to bring us back to remembering that we're whole because we've been so disconnected and fragmented. So as this starts to happen, we can tune in to watching. We can still feel, but we're not going to get drugged down into the story as much. But we have to allow, I believe, a certain amount of space for the grace of time and space to where, wow, I feel really lost. I feel super confused. This feels very uncomfortable. I feel like I don't fit. I don't belong. I feel deeply lonely. I feel like I'm really depressed. What is going on? If we don't give all of that space, we're going to miss an opportunity to tap into or to fine tune to something else that is not reeling in the personality story. So
Yeah.
this is really, when we're talking about awakening, there's so many different stages and phases, but we do start to have these different perspectives that are no longer who we've known ourselves to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was going to say
Have
that
to
that
let
was.
go. Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, I
But
love
that's
that.
a
No, I was
key
going to
thing.
say, yeah.
We
Yeah.
have to let go. And if we don't know how to let go, then we need to learn, right? We need to start learning, or this is what I help guide people with. Like, how do you start to learn this process and to know that you're okay? This is perfect. You're right on track,
Yeah.
spiritually speaking. So go ahead.
I love that. Yeah, that surrender, that, and I realize that's a process for, at least I know in my own experience that it, and you certainly have helped me greatly with that. And I was going to ask as well, I don't know if this ties into what you were just sharing, but there was something that you wrote that really reached me as well, that when you talked about from that deep space within, that you were starting to spend more time in and get more familiar with, that you saw that your physical body and mind would be feeling the turmoil and yet not, and almost as if you were experiencing the body, you weren't experiencing the body as yours. And so I didn't know if there's anything else you might add or any other reflections, tying those things together.
Yeah, it's definitely a very visceral experience, and I don't really know how to put it into words, but what I hope and what I trust is that when people, when you start to glimpse that, it. But then
Yeah.
to know that that's exactly what you're supposed to be feeling. And the body holds so much information for us when we take our energy from outside and learn how to sensitize inside. I watched the Social Dilemma last night.
Oh yeah, you'd been
And
talking about that. Yeah.
yeah, so there was this great line, which I don't know if I'm going to remember it exactly, but what it said is that attention extraction. Okay, so listen to each word. Attention extraction is
Mm.
not how we want to treat human beings. So they're talking about social media and technology and all of these ways in which we're constantly pulled out.
Yeah.
Okay, so attention extraction is the intention of the third dimensional paradigm, not just through technology, through going, doing, shopping, eating, like, right? Everything that takes us out desensitizes us to our soul connection.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this isn't a small thing. This is a very large thing that as we start to wake up, to recognize that as we're hitting the higher frequencies, we still want to be deeply connected to what's going on in here, because this is our guide. This is our sacred technology. This is
Yeah.
like the rudder. But if we're scattered and fragmented and depleted in our energy field, we're going to miss the subtle communications of the body.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, it
Does
definitely
that
does. It
help
definitely
that or
does.
tie
Yeah.
that in a little bit?
Oh, it absolutely does. And that's
Okay.
and then I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's the next thing I was going to ask, is in terms of, as the story continued, there was, in fact, and I'll go ahead and actually just read a little bit of this and then ask you about it. You were speaking about a period in which you would be awake and then drift off to, and I love this, what you called the odd limbo land inside.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I was wanting to do was just see if anything you can share about that, discovering that level of consciousness. And I was wondering at that time, and I don't know if it's a fair question to ask or if you remember, you know, I know that as the story progresses, you know, clearly this, you know, returning back to that place within yourself became more of your practice, but just getting some sense of, was this something that you were starting to discover that this was the point of all of this?
Yeah. What part is that you're, which
Yeah, actually in the prologue, yeah, I was
okay,
just speaking of,
okay,
you're speaking
okay,
just about that odd limbo land inside that you
okay,
would just find yourself, and this may have been during the periods of sickness and after, I'm not 100%
right,
sure, but
right,
yeah.
because there are a few different phases of that. So yeah, so when this pull to just keep coming back in, I did start recognizing that, again, I didn't have the words for it. I didn't have the language,
Yeah.
right? But I did start recognizing over and over, that was where I felt whole, where I felt complete, where I felt home, where I felt, I don't know the right word for it, but where I felt God's presence, or that deeper, higher, whatever, like I was home.
Yeah.
I was there. And over the years, honestly, I didn't like coming out of that place for a long time. And in part, it was because I was supposed to stay in that place, but also I became so resonant with it that nothing else felt as real or as true as who I was in that space. So I became very aware of the difference between my soul connected self and my soul presence and my personality. And there were
Yeah.
definitely periods of time where my personality felt very uncomfortable and not, I didn't enjoy it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm also going to ask you, just as a practitioner, what it has been like for you when you have someone that you're working with, that you see them for the first time go to that place, or maybe they've been to
Mhm.
that place before but just weren't really sure, or maybe they felt like there was
Yeah.
something they had to do, but when you see them, you experience that with them, when you are there with them as they finally are able to surrender to
Yes.
that, just what that's like for you.
Um, I love that so much. And it's sort of like this celebration goes off inside me because I know what's in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I might have my flavor of it, but I know the connection of truth, of source, and of our wholeness. And that becomes like, sometimes I have to be mindful not to put too much expectation on other people's process, right? Because it's a process.
Yeah.
Um, but it's very celebratory for me because I
Yeah.
know that if they can surrender in that first time, they can start to learn how to get back. But again, we have to choose to want to go there, and we have to choose to. So here's the other thing I want to share about that, I guess, is that um, the human mind and the human personality has a lot of labels and stories around when we sort of surrender into nothingness, when we spend time, because it takes time doing nothing
Yeah.
to get sometimes into that space. If you are choosing to do it as a practice, you can dip in there, yoga nidra can take you there. You can go in there through tools and techniques.
Yeah.
However, when we start to surrender consciously to our soul's, it's sort of like this pull. And I write about this a little bit more in Tucson, where it was getting stronger and stronger.
Yeah.
Do you want me to tie that together?
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah, thank
Okay.
you. Absolutely.
So there's like this pull that will want to invite us in first, right?
Yeah.
And there's all sorts of labels. For a long time, I called it Divine Mother. Sometimes when I was in resistance, I would call it the energy. So I had like different personifications, right, for it, depending on what was going on with my perception at the time. Okay.
Yeah.
And my stories about what was happening. So I have a lot of people who will say, yeah, you know, sometimes I just lay on my back and the next thing I know is I could spend an hour or two and all of a sudden I wake up, but I don't really think that I was ever really asleep. And I'm like,
Yeah.
woo. So what people can experience is not a class or a guided meditation of Yoga Nidra, but the actual true Yoga Nidra or yogic sleep that happens spontaneously through the inner pull of our soul.
Yeah.
That wants to take us out of the ego identification and into sort of what I call the gap or this darkness, this emptiness, this void. Now, sometimes what will happen is somebody might be conscious that they might go into the void and then they might have a thought. And when the thought comes, right, because their brain waves are hitting the, like the delta and the theta brain waves, where there isn't really any conscious thought happening. But then thought comes in and then they realize, oh my gosh, like I've been in this black hole. And oftentimes that blackness can feel like, because we're disconnected from ourselves, it feels like a death. So people can get anxious about that and nervous about that, and it can feel scary if they don't understand what's happening. And naturally, as we begin to awaken, we're going to have some of these experiences that are going to happen spontaneously. So this is the soul, right? This is our connection with soul that's wanting us to lessen our hold on our third dimensional reality.
Yeah.
So there was another time in Moki, stop it. Sorry. There was another time, a period of time, years later, when we had moved to Tucson. I was there to go to school at the Tree of Life. My agenda was I was going to do my caregiving at night, and then I would have my daytimes to really study and work. And I was very excited. And soul had another agenda.
Yes.
There was another initiation period for me that could only happen by my ability to surrender into longer periods of time in this yogic sleep space. And I would literally sit down at the computer to like get to work, and all of a sudden I would just start feeling so tired. So at first I was like, okay, well, I need to drink my mate, right, to keep me awake and keep me focused. Right?
Yeah.
Because personality had its plan. Mate didn't matter. Right?
Wow. Yeah.
So this went on for months. It was very frustrating to my plan. And the times that I was internal would sometimes be 3 hours at a time.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I'm pulled in. Okay, I'm going to go lay down. I lay on my back. I'm gone for 3 hours. I wake up, and I'm aware different things were happening, but it's okay. I'm used to this. I'm like, 8 years into this process at this point. And I'm like, okay, now I'm going to work. An hour later, back in for another, couple hours. So if I had not been gradually initiated into this process by my soul,
Yeah.
by knowing the cues to listen to, this isn't depression, this isn't lethargy. Everybody needs to also, I also want to say, everybody needs to do whatever you think is right. If you feel like you're getting sick, if you feel like there's something deeper wrong, go to the doctor. If everything comes back fine, 90%, I'm going to say it's going to be this soul connection, particularly if you're on a spiritual path.
Yeah. Yeah.
So people mistaken the soul because soul wants to take us in. Soul wants to kind of like weigh us down. Maybe soul wants to reveal parts of us that are grieving, are fearful, are lonely, are exhausted. And the third dimensional paradigm doesn't like that. The ego construct doesn't like that and comes up with all sorts of things that are wrong with this. You're being antisocial. You need to, you're isolating. You need to be out and doing things. If only you move, then your body would gain more energy.
Yeah.
Right? So, these are all very common misunderstandings because we haven't learned how to be initiated into our soul's guidance.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it can feel isolatory at times, but the truth is when you're done doing that initial inner mystery, this is our inner mystery. This is the mystery school. We're not going out anywhere to go to a mystery school. It's happening inside of us. And our soul is that guide that takes us through the layers and the dark nooks and crannies and communicates through sensation and subtle whispers. But we have to have enough space from the static and stimulus to hear, and we have to be willing to put our fear over here, at least for a little bit, or the discomfort of spending time within to reap the deep benefits.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. I literally feel like that is sort of the kind of the coming in for the conclusion that really ties everything that you have shared together so beautifully. And it is so incredibly compelling. I am just so grateful that you've taken this time and to share these experiences that you had and how you have evolved and to be able to share this with others, I think is so wonderful to be able to help be on the journey with others as they are experiencing these things and how they can surrender to this. And I don't want to oversimplify this. I know it's not always as easy as that it is work, right?
It is work, but it is really important. And I think what's going to be happening are people are coming up against, people are exhausted right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people are feeling very disillusioned. People are feeling very confused. People are feeling very depleted. And their attention has been extracted
Yeah.
outside of them, even, you know, in a compounded way this year. And the only place that we're truly going to find the peace and the clarity to know what our inner compass is by going within. And the more disillusioned and exhausted people get, this is where we're going to recharge. This is where we're going to find the solace that we need. Nobody is going to fix us anymore. Like, it's an inside job, and this is where we're being called. And I think a lot of people are experiencing the beginnings of their dark night of the soul.
Yeah, thank you. And I was going to say, I feel like I just got it half right, that I realized there is the work, you know, in terms of doing the work, but then there's also the opportunity to have that deep rest and that soul connection, right? It doesn't take work, right? That's the opportunity to recharge and to be reconnected with that, with that deep inner knowing, that soul connection.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much. I honor you so much for taking this time and sharing your journey and you know, being able to reflect back on that, and just really feel like this will be incredibly meaningful and very nourishing for people. I can't thank you enough.
Oh, well, thank you, Jeff. And thank you for hosting and having this conversation, and for holding the space. And I love it. And I'm just really grateful for your energy and all of the work you've done as well.
Well,
and I love
thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Yes.
Thanks again. Really appreciate you.
Thank you.